Hello, everybody around the world, and thank you for joining us today. We have the largest group we've ever had signed up, or over 450, and rising. So I'm saying that at the outset, because if you want to ask a question, I learned something. We had another session yesterday, and most of the questions came in the last 10 minutes. So most of the people didn't get a chance to ask their questions. So if you have a question, you can start thinking about them. We'll be telling you how to do it if you don't know, and make it easier for our speakers. But let's let's deal with the very quickly with the back facts. We'd like to take a moment to thank our UCLA co-sponsors for helping us spread the word about this event. The most numbers at UCLA ever involved with us, International Institute, CMED's home base. We're very honored that it's joined us. The Berkeley Center for International Relations, the Nazarian Center for Israel Studies, the Department of Political Science, and the Luskin Department of Public Policy. Now, I've been asked to give you a number of items that you should keep in mind. I'm going to go a little quicker than usual, so we'll have more time. First of all, when while you can see us, we cannot see or hear you. Secondly, we are recording the presentation today, and the video will be available on the CMED website, YouTube, and our Facebook page as soon as possible. So if you want it again, you want friends to see it, possible to see it. If you are joining us using Zoom, please notice the chat window at the bottom of the screen. We will share announcements during the talk with you here. They're always very useful. However, you will not be able to add comments in the chat box. If you have questions for our speakers, please type them in the Q&A window, also at the bottom of your screen. Those are for questions for our speakers. Be sure to include your name and your country and/or affiliation. And note that your name, country, and/or affiliation will be announced aloud along with your question. Only the CMED team will be able to see your questions. In some cases, we will answer questions in writing in the Q&A window for others to see. Please keep questions concise so we can answer as many questions as possible, especially this time. If you are joining us on the YouTube platform, please note you will not be able to ask a question because comments will be disabled. And so now, I want to interview two people who do not really require any description, so I will be shorter than usual. Two of America's leading figures on these topics. I was amazed and so excited when they both immediately said yes to this session, which was set up so late. And given the circumstances, and I know the two of them have been traveling and moving around, so we're really, really, really grateful. Ms. Robin Wright is a senior fellow at the U.S. Institute of Peace and the Woodrow Wilson Center. She has reported from more than 140 countries for the New Yorker, the Washington Post, Time, the NYT Magazine, and the LA Times, among others. She is everywhere. I'm always excited when I see her name. She has received numerous awards for her work, including the UN Correspondents Association Gold Medal for International Affairs, the National Magazine Award for Iran Reportage, and the Overseas Press Club Award for her coverage of African wars. And Robin Wright has written 8 books. Wow. Okay, our second speaker is behind the scenes a great deal more. Matthew McInnes is a senior fellow at the Institute for the Study of War. He previously served as the Deputy Special Representative for Iran and as a member of policy planning at the U.S. Department of State. He was also a resident fellow at American Enterprise Institute in Foreign Defense Policy after serving for 15 years in the Department of Defense as an intelligence officer and advisor on Middle East, China, and non-proliferation issues. And we're very excited to have both these speakers. It's now time for the question and answer portion, but before that, the question and answer portion is going to come from me. That was our arrangement. I'm going to ask one question, and then we go out to everyone. Never done this quite as quick as we're doing. So again, if you want to get on that list, this is a good time, but I'm going to ask our two speakers, where are we now after these two very important developments on the Israeli-Palestinian front? And I will, at the end, I will invite Matt first, so I will ask Robin first this time.
Thanks so much, Steve. I'm delighted to be with you, and I'm particularly glad to be with Matt. We always have an interesting back and forth. So the twin attacks, first by Israel on an Iranian diplomatic facility in Damascus on April 1st, followed by the Iranian retaliation, stunning retaliation against Israel on April 14th. Israel, they are a contrast, and Israel was extremely effective in eliminating 3 generals who led covert operations by Iran in Syria and Lebanon. They leveled a diplomatic facility that abutted the Syrian embassy, the Iranian embassy in Syria. By contrast, the Iranian operation involving, more than 300 drones and missiles was an utter failure. The State Department called it, a spectacular failure, an embarrassing failure. The fact that Iran unleashed so many weapons and not a single one did significant damage, did injure 1 child from shrapnel, although it's not clear shrapnel from what. But so we're seeing a real imbalance. I think one of the challenges is, what happens next? The 2 countries have very different strategies. Israel is playing the short game. It's very good at identifying challenges and preempting them, either by physical attack or cyber attack. It has now proven its deterrent capability with the help of the United States, Britain, France, and Jordan. It has far superior military capabilities. At the same time, it's not clear what its long-term strategy is in terms of what does it want? Does it want to see regime change in Iran? Does it want to attack or prevent a nuclear facility in the short term? Is it willing to go that far? And I worry that on the Israeli side, they have short-term goals. And it's the same with Gaza. There's no visible or viable plan to get out of the mess, either in Gaza or the tensions with Iran. In the meantime, Iran is playing a longer game. It has, since the revolution, it went through an initial period of having purged the military, having no capabilities, and having to fight an 8-year war with Iraq. It has since developed an extraordinary network of allies in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. It's been very effective in tapping into the dissent and opposition on the ground to create militias that are non-state actors and are threats not just to Israel, but to the kind of strategic balance in the region. It's also worked on its missile arsenal. It has now the largest and most diverse missile arsenal in the Middle East, the only country in the world that has a missile with a range of 200 kilometers and doesn't also have a nuclear weapon. At the same time, Iran's goals are totally unrealistic, totally ineffective. It claims to want to defeat Israel and force US troops out of the Middle East, and neither is going to happen anytime soon. In the same time, you have the hardest line governments in both countries, in Israel since the 1948 independence, and in Iran since the 1979 revolution. And there's no prospect that the political environment will change, even if leaders do, anytime soon. So you have this growing tensions, increasingly hardline governments with unrealistic goals in terms of stopping the other one completely. And therein lie the long-term dangers.
Thanks, Steve, and always great to be on here with you and with Robin. And I have to, echo most of what Robin said. I think she captured really the very unique situation that we have right now between Iran and Israel. I think, certainly from the U.S. perspective, there was a lot of concern as we saw the attack coming in Saturday, but also, frankly, afterwards, real pride that we were able to prevent. Supporting Israel with our partners, being able to prevent, almost 99% of the attack. And I think for us, that is something that has really struck home about the effectiveness of not only U.S. military and Israeli military capabilities, but also the importance of the partnerships that the U.S. has in the region. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons coming out of it, despite all the pressures on things like the Abraham Accords after October 7th, that when the missiles started flying, the partners really came together in supporting their mutual, in many ways, our mutual defense here in this situation. And then the other, main thing for us is also figuring out what are we getting wrong about, about our assessments of Iranian calculations? Because I do think there was the scope of the attack was beyond what most people anticipated. So, we have to think through what is is there a new risk calculus right now in Tehran that we don't fully understand. And I think this is one of the areas where, as much as we were, glad about our ability to, support Israel in its defense, at the same time, we could have had a really disastrous situation on Saturday. It could have escalated quite significantly, especially if there had been, more loss of life, more damage to more sensitive infrastructure. So I think that we were still really on a knife's edge on Saturday, and that's the concern as we move forward. We know that Israel is making clear that they will almost certainly respond to this. And then, of course, we would, the anticipation that, Iran has made clear that it would respond following any other Israeli actions. The U.S. has made clear that we will not support any counterattack operations by the Israelis. We will continue to support Israel's defense, of course. But I think we're at the point where, are we miscalculating here? Have we not fully, assessed, Iranian decision making the way we should? Is Iran making significant miscalculations? And there's also the big issue of how this is all shaping the Iranian proxy dynamics within the axis of resistance, the internal pressures that are happening there between the proxies and the leadership in Tehran, who's pushing whom to do what, are some of those really interesting questions that the last few weeks have raised. And with that, I will pause and look forward to the further conversation.
All right. Thank you both. And we were exactly on time to begin our question. I appreciate it. Now, both of you can answer these questions, or one of you, whichever you both feel comfortable. I hope at least one will. First, we have a good friend who the three of us know very well, Antonia Demieux, who is at the Institute for Security and Defense Analyses in Greece and has been working with our program for over 25 years. This is her question. What are the new preconditions that the U.S. administration is expected to set for dealing with the Iranian nuclear file after Iran's attack on Israel? This is about the United States. So that's interesting. Either of you want to go first?
I see Matt writing, so I'll weigh in just briefly. I mean, when we talk about preconditions, we're really at an impasse here. The joint plan of action, JCPOA, is now moribund. It's obsolete. Iran has moved so far beyond, and so many of the steps that were outlined in the deal have been, have been passed. I mean, the deadlines have been, the sunset clauses, as they call them. We've passed those, and I think the United States really is kind of in a conundrum. What does it do about Iran? It's been very clear in either condemning or promising to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear capability. It's been obvious in its support for Israel. But the question is, how do you engage, or how do you do something to ensure that Iran doesn't get a bomb? This is the problem. The mood, and especially in an election year, is the United States is currently not going to take anything. And there are two very different approaches between Republicans and Democrats. Do you take on Iran and all the issues we have at one time, or do you take it on just on the nuclear issue, hoping that once you get the most dangerous element for the United States and its allies off the table, that you can make progress on the other? We've had very different approaches, but both Republicans and Democrats agree that the United States won't let Iran get the bomb. I don't know how it does that now, since diplomacy is dead, and the U.S. certainly doesn't want to get engaged in a full-scale military confrontation with Iran. That's one of the reasons we've said to Israel, you're on your own if you retaliate. We will not be part of it. So this is, when we talk about preconditions, the one thing the United States has done today, April 18th, is impose new sanctions. It has been joined by Britain, and it will be joined by the Europeans in the next few days. The problem is the Biden administration has imposed more than 600 sanctions on individuals and entities. The Trump administration imposed more than 1,500 sanctions on individuals and entities, including the entire Revolutionary Guard Corps, something we didn't do to the entire, the Soviet army. This is was a very unique step, and yet it has had absolutely, well, you can't say no impact, but it's had limited impact on Iran's capabilities. Iran has learned how to, whether it's smuggle technology or parts to, and it has a robust defense capability in manufacturing its own weaponry now. And so that's the problem. What are the options? And unfortunately, there aren't any that are obvious or are likely to be successful in the near future.
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, what I would add is that there is, part of this is because we are in an election year, it's going to be very difficult to move forward on really anything. So I think the prospects for negotiations by the U.S. administration or the Iranians is fairly limited. At the same time, I think that there's the beginning thoughts about what may be done in 2025, whether we have a second Biden term or we have a new second Trump administration, especially given that we're going to have the expiration of the snapback clauses in October of 2025. So there's a certain window that's going to occur next year that I think folks need to be potentially focused on. So I think a lot of what's going to happen, depending on how things play out, on the military side, and how things are going to play out in Gaza, how things are going to play out internally in Iran, is many ways kind of prelude to what may or may not may try to happen in 2025. The other thing is, Robin points out rightly, that our divide that we've had inside U.S. policy on whether to keep a nuke only focus for negotiations, or tie in some of the regional and missile and drone and other proliferation concerns. And that's been a debate for many years. I think one of the challenges, especially given the role that Iran has played, not just in these recent attacks and in supplying, the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, et cetera, with missiles and drones, but also what they've been doing with Russia. over the last couple of years has kind of changed the equation for the ability to really separate these, especially the conventional proliferation concerns from the nuclear file. And I think certainly many of our European partners, from what they've seen of Iran's role in the Ukraine war, it's just made it very difficult to think about how do you separate these issues now. I'm not saying they couldn't be, but I think that there is a broader perception that it's increasingly difficult to disentangle the regional proliferation, conventional proliferation concerns and the nuclear file. So I think that's one of the things that is still really a major challenge for whoever is in power in 2025.
Steve,
So-
can I add something real quickly? Because I think
Sure.
that's a really important point. First of all, just to define snapback sanctions, this is something that if one of the 6 major parties to the deal, invokes sanctions, that the other 5 have to as well. And that's really important. The ability of the world to, under terms they had agreed to before, all act in concert. Now that plays into something else Matt said, which is really important, and that's the global divide. Between 2013 and 2015, you saw the world's 6 major powers agree on something, even as Russia was invading Crimea. Russia or China, Britain, France, Germany, and the United States negotiated, tortured negotiations sometimes, to come up with, I think it was 159 pages of terms. And today you see a very different global environment where China and Russia are siding with Iran. They did at the special UN session at the Security Council on Sunday. They're blaming Israel for starting this kind of, it's more than a tit for tat, but this series of escalatory steps. And the idea that you'd have the world's 6 major powers ever speak together again, at least anytime soon, is, just not going to happen.
Such an important point. We have a lot of questions coming in as expected, but I'm going to keep for a little while the Iranian questions that are coming in. And next is Professor Joyce Glantz at UCLA. And the question is, although I understand that Iran's political structure must be eradicated, how do we protect the good population of Iran who hate their government?
I'm happy to jump in. I also want to defer to Matt on any issue. Look, one of the great challenges is dealing with Iran, not just its leadership. How do we try to factor in the entire population? The rule of thumb in political science is that a dictator, an autocrat, an authoritarian needs 30% of the population to back it, to man the security forces, to pay at least partially taxes, and to run the bureaucracy. I've thought for a number of years that Iran was hovering on the cusp of that 30%. I think it may be a little bit less now. The reality is that the inspiring demonstrations we saw in 2022 over the issue of hijab, personal freedoms, and eventually, challenges to the regime itself, didn't have the kind of network resources, platform, game plan. They knew what they were against and not what they were for. This is an evolutionary process. And the danger is that if outside powers try to go in and dictate, who should be in power or facilitate regime change, that we're back in that cycle that we were in after 1953, when the US and Britain helped orchestrate a coup against a democratically elected government. So this is the conundrum, diplomatically, in terms of policy going forward. I have a new piece in the New Yorker today about a wonderful film about a single act of dissent. It's a short called The Smallest Power, and it's about one woman who did one thing during those protests and how it changed her view. Before, she had wanted to leave Iran. She had a medical degree, she learned to speak English fluently, but after the protests in which she carried out one small act, she decided she didn't want to leave, that she wanted to fight for her country. And it's, how do we do things that don't dictate, but help nurture without getting involved the population so they can decide what their own future is.
Matt, do you want to get in on this or should we move on? Whatever you say.
No, I think Robin makes some great points there. I think we have uh, we have focused so much on how to support the Iranian people, and we're not always, to be frank, know exactly what we need to do. We have many efforts ongoing, particularly out of the State Department, to support civil society and support the Iranian people. Getting around internet blockages, et cetera. That there's all sorts of ways that we can help the Iranian people, frankly, be able to make their own choices and be able to have their voices heard and be able to pressure the leadership from within. But at the same time, this is something that really needs to come from the Iranian people. And we need to show our support and solidarity. But it is very challenging to think through more radical options otherwise. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, we're going to have another Iran question, and then move on to some other issues that people are bringing to the discussion. But Professor Albin, also of UCLA, asked the following. I wouldn't want to be having to answer this. Look into your crystal ball 1 year from now. Will Iran be the main focus of our foreign policy in the Middle East and not the war in Gaza?
No, it's an interesting question because, obviously that could be it could be very different depending on who is elected in November. Even though I think, frankly, either Biden or Trump are going to have an approach where they do not want major expansion of conflict in the region. So that pull away from the Middle East, which for better or for worse has been President Biden's approach. I think that there is, very fair criticism that a little too much neglect or desire to pull away. At the same time, I think President Trump is certainly going to want to move quickly to kind of, I don't say calm down or try to fix the situation. But I also really doubt that he's going to want major escalations, in the region immediately. So I think that this time next year, we're going to be in a state of flux on our policy, and trying to figure out what's the next steps for either Biden 2 or for Trump 2. But I think that my expectation is that the Gaza situation will likely have died down by then. And I think that it's more likely we are going to have a greater focus on Iran at that point, relatively.
I would have said the same thing, Robin.
So I'd probably take a slightly different tack. I don't think that Hamas is going to disappear, even if its leadership is decapitated, its arsenal destroyed. That this is an idea. And one of the things that's been striking is that there are many people across the region, I've found anyway, who disapprove of Hamas's tactics, don't like its ideology, but see it as the only force that is acting on behalf of the Palestinians. They see it as the resistance, even if we in the outside world look at it very differently. And I think with the destruction that's happened in Gaza, that the focus will be on either rebuilding or finding a solution. The problem is, all the ideas that the United States has put forward about who rules in Gaza after a war, who's in charge of security, all these questions don't have takers or don't have buy-in from either side. And so there's a danger that this festers on in a way, and it's obviously related to whether it's what the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea and disrupting international trade, what Hezbollah is doing on the border, what the groups in Iraq and Syria have done. All of them say they will not stop until the end of the war in Gaza. And so in many ways, both what happens in Gaza and happens in Iran are absolutely related. And I think Matt made an important point. We're going to be in flux. Whoever is in power a year from now. Because remember, after the inauguration, it takes months to get officials confirmed. There's likely to be changes in senior positions in the second term of either man. And so the idea that we can push forward simply after an inauguration is an illusion. This is going to be, I think, a complicated issue. Now, one of the big questions is, what is it going to take for the main focus of the United States to shift? Does China do something on Taiwan? Do we see some turning point in the war in Ukraine or beyond? And so there are ways that other factors, because they become more dynamic or more immediate, overtake it. But I think the idea that we're going to solve either problem in Gaza or Iran within the next year in a way that satisfies all, that calms down and restabilizes, well, it's never been stable, but stabilizes the situation in the Middle East. I don't see it, but I want to tell you, I really, really hope I'm wrong.
Well, that's an interesting ending. But we did hear two different versions, which is so helpful to all of us. Now we're going to step a little bit away from where we've been, but not from UCLA. Warren Fahmy, who's a major figure in our institute, he's got a question, and it goes like this. In light of recent events, do you feel there is a strong chance that both Jordan and Egypt, who both have longstanding treaties with Israel, could face protests that reach the level of the 2010-2011 Arab Spring protests? If they reach this level, what are the chances that one or both countries revoke their treaties with Israel, given that in both countries the treaties are unpopular with the general population?
I can take it. Yeah, I think there obviously is great concern on the Jordanian side right now. I mean, Egypt has, ever since October 7th, the concerns that Egypt may feel it has to be forced to reevaluate its treaty with Israel. I think that's been a steady thing, but I think the events of this past weekend are putting very significant pressure on Jordan and the pressure from the domestic population, of which, as most of you know, a large portion of that is Palestinian. So that is certainly a concern of that I think the U.S. administration has. I don't think you're going to hit a point where either side is going to want to abrogate or pull out of their respective treaties with Israel. I think that would be a pretty extreme situation for either of them, but I do think that they both risk pretty significant domestic stability if this situation, as Robin was describing it in the last question, that we have this ongoing fight in even if we've ended quote unquote major combat operations or whatever inside Gaza, that there's going to be long-standing continued military counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, rebuilding, political infighting, a situation that, and of course, a humanitarian situation that will certainly continue. All of these things could be going on for an indefinite amount of time. And so that for me is I'm worried about the domestic. I'm not as worried ultimately about the treaty pressures.
So I agree with Matt, but I do think, remember 2010, 2011 were against autocratic leaders. And it's now harder, particularly in Egypt, to protest because people, whether it's in independent media or quasi-independent media, protesters, dissidents, a lot of them have been locked up, silenced, harassed, intimidated. We're in a very different kind of world in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, for the same reason that the Iranians protests in 2022 didn't work, because again, these were predominantly young people without a platform, without the resources, without the network, without they didn't have parties. They knew what they were against and not what they were for. I don't see that happening soon. But I think there are other factors that are going to lead to destabilization and challenge governments. And I think what's happening in the West Bank, we can't forget that the number of people who've been killed in Israeli raids, the number of people who've been arrested, the settler violence that has escalated tensions in the region. This is adding to the challenges both of the moment and of the future. And speaking of aging leadership, Mahmoud Abbas is 86, 87, has been in power 2 decades and hasn't allowed an election to take place. And so there are other things that will inflame, I think, the Arab populations. And the question is, how far are they willing to go to make their voices heard? And so I think, again, when we can tend to be kind of siloed in this problem, Gaza, and then this problem, Iran, but that there is a potential for wider. Just one thing quickly to add, and that is that you see Arab governments taking sides. Jordan participated. There are reports that there are other Arab countries who may have engaged but didn't want their names out there to reflect their role in deflecting Iran's attack. So that's an interesting dynamic too, and how far does that go?
That's a very interesting point, and I think myself that we don't know all the countries, but I'll leave it at that. And now we're going to go to a very interesting question from Makana Abu Sayyaf, who is from Gaza, although was able to get out of it at the present time. A very complex story. Anyway, Dr. Robin just indicated the U.S. policy and sanctions have limited impact on Iran. The question is, what policy should the U.S. adopt to put more pressure on Iran? Or do you think that it's about time to switch gears toward Iran before the whole Middle East region is on fire? You should be first on this since you're mentioned here, Robin, if you're game.
Well, I kind of answered that before, and that is, the U.S. has limited options here. We have two basic toolkits in our arsenal, our military and diplomatic arsenal. One is sanctions, which we've used extensively, and to limited impact, and the other is military, and we have been willing to go only so far with the military option. I don't think we're willing anytime in the near future to go much further. And that's what the conundrum is for Washington. How do you have influence? Remember, the United States can't do things alone that have the kind of sweeping attack on Iran from 2003 to 2006, I think it was, or 2010 to 2013. We engaged in a number of sanctions, but we did it with the international community through the United Nations. And that then ultimately played a major role in getting Iran to the negotiating table in 2013. Today, we have been predominantly alone. For years, we've been predominantly alone. Now you see Britain signing on to some, the Europeans perhaps next week. But are they going to be the kind of big things that will make Iran rethink its strategy, particularly when it believes that it's under fire, that there are existential threats to the regime when it faces a political turning point? And so I wish there were a simple answer. I think the United States, has tried to say to Israel, use restraint, take this as a win, let's stop. But Israel feels differently. And under Prime Minister Netanyahu, Israel has taken a much tougher course.
Matt?
Yeah, I think, again, sanctions work to a point when there's a policy objective tied to it, and that there are clear, I won't say assurances is not the right word, but there's understanding that sanctions will be relieved if certain policy changes are made. And I think that, the challenge as someone obviously that was very much involved in the maximum pressure campaign in the last administration, I try to remind folks that it is the purpose of the sanctions in reality was to get Iran to the point of wanting to negotiate again for a new deal, which is what President Trump wanted. And I think, there is obviously some internal debates over the years about, how much pressure is needed in order to get the right amount of leverage, to get the right position for the right types of negotiations. And I think, when you look at that, like the same thing with the sanctions regime that that was established beginning in the George W. Bush years and certainly expanded during President Obama's term, as Robin was discussing with partners, allies, the rest of the UNSC, that you need that kind of pressure as part of but it can't be the only thing. It needs to be part of diplomatic efforts that are more oriented towards isolating or pressuring or encouraging Iran to take certain policy steps, as well as frankly to demonstrate that there's going to be potential military consequences at the far end of this. That if there is if particularly we're talking about the nuclear program and the moves towards a nuclear weapon, if we see that, we're committed to preventing that. That's something that's been our policy. Certainly the British and the French's policy for a long time, the Israeli policy. So we have to be able to use the diplomatic, the economic, and the military, and find the right way to pressure as well as encourage. And that's a real challenge to do. And I think right now, given all the success and failures we've had over the past 20 15 10 15 20 years, I think that for us right now, we are in a stage of frankly trying to contain the issue as much as possible, and try to encourage the region itself to further integrate, further cooperate, and as maybe we're never going to get to collective security, but I think the more that is shown, as we've seen this past weekend, that the region is not going to find Iran's military activities and military pressure acceptable. I think that's going to help, I think push Iran to rethink a bit about how it's been postured regionally, which I think is a first step, at least on that part of the pathway.
Well, we have a very interesting question from Salma Smasi of the University of College London, and she was for several years assistance for us at COVID. Assuming Iran knows the strength of the Iran Dome, did they really expect the missiles to cause mass destruction in Israel, or were there other intentions? Can we believe Iranian officials when they say they don't intend to escalate beyond this? Nah.
Yeah, I can take the first stab of that. I think it's interesting. Of course, the Iranians have been trying to understand, and the Iron Dome, as well as David Sling and the rest of the integrated air and missile defense capacity that Israel has. They've been studying it for a long time, and so it's a very intriguing question of why did they underestimate the strength of that. And certainly so much of what we've seen over the years from Iranian exercises, what we think we know about their doctrine, certainly in what they've been working with Hezbollah and more recently the Houthis and others, is this saturation idea of how do you overload the Iron Dome system to the point where it can't handle repeated salvos of these types of munitions. And I think that the Iranians were, my guess is that they were expecting to have much more penetration. In fact, one of the things that we're looking at my home institution at Institute for Study of War is looking at what the kind of the learning that may be going on, between Russia and Iran in the Ukraine theater, and really trying to understand, the kind of rates of penetration that the Shahed and the other Iranian drones are having against Ukraine, as well as with the missiles, are at much higher penetration, so where they could, and perhaps they were, anticipating, given the success of their systems in the Ukraine theater, that their systems in the Israeli theater could have had that same type of effect, or at least a little bit better than what they actually ended up with. So I think this is one of the things that is really interesting about how the Iranians are going to recalculate after the events of Saturday, and think through how can they improve that rate, again, because 100 plus ballistic missiles is quite a bit. and it didn't get through. At least most of it did not get through. And so I think this is my fear is that the Iranians are going to learn a lot from what happened, and recalibrate for the next round, if we have one.
I agree. I agree completely with Matt. I think there are two things we need to understand, though, that Iran, as stunning as its attack was in terms of more than 330 missiles and drones, that was just a fraction of its arsenal. It has over 3,000 ballistic missiles alone, and that yes, it was a learning experience, but yes, they've got an awful lot to unleash. And frankly, I wrote a piece 3 years ago about how Iran, largely because of its missile capabilities, has reached a point that the Pentagon calls overmatch. And that is where Iran and its allies could, if they unleashed half or more of what they have collectively, they could penetrate. Now, it would be a very expensive because it could sap their arsenals, sap their, the arsenals they've built over years, but they could do damage. So we shouldn't take for granted that Israel has a foolproof deterrent system. I think there's a real danger in kind of coming to that conclusion. And I do think that I just actually was sent something, kind of a news bulletin out of Iran, that the general Haq Talab, who is in charge of nuclear security for the Revolutionary Guards, has come out today and said, because of what's going on with Israel, we are going to reconsider our nuclear strategy and our nuclear policy. And, we can only hope that's bluff and rhetoric, but there's a real danger that Iran now feels, and remember, it's a paranoid revolution, xenophobic, suspicious because of its minority status, whether it's ethnically, politically, in terms of religion, that it will look for a way to prove that it has a deterrent capability too. And that's the danger when we talk about escalation and a wider war. Yes, there are obviously dangers that it brings in, whether it's a greater role by the proxies or brings in other countries. But the real danger is a revision in Iranian strategy that really brings us into a whole new ballgame. And frankly, I'm at the point that I believe that Iran will become the 10th nuclear power.
If I can add one other note on Robin's great comments, for me, as we were watching what may happen with the Iranian nuclear program after Saturday, for me, if they decide to move towards a weapon, I wonder if it is almost kind of admitting the failure of what they've been trying to do for the last 10 plus years, of really building up their conventional defenses and their conventional offensive and defensive capabilities to be on that, as Rob was describing, both the overmatch as well as having the defensive capacity to withstand what they think the Israelis or the U.S. could throw at them. That they've been very focused, in addition to everything happening with the nuclear program, to really build up their conventional capacity. And in some ways, kind of after everything, they find we're just going to have to go for a nuke. I mean, they could do that. It's certainly a fear, but it does feel a bit like that's kind of admitting that their strategy hasn't quite worked. And I don't quite know if they're ready for that. I think they certainly want to be telegraphing right now, at least they seem to be wanting to telegraph that they are thinking about it, and hopefully to have some deterrent effect, I assume. But it's this balance and interaction between their conventional thinking and the conventional doctrine and the defenses and their potential use of that strategically ambiguous nuclear program that we've been so worried about for the last 25 years. That for me is really fascinating, and I don't know where the Iranians will go with that.
And I want to add something to Matt too. It's really important to understand that if Iran does take the political decision to make a bomb, that it will be for deterrent capabilities. They don't intend, I don't think, under even the most hardline government Iran has ever experienced, I don't think their intention is to use it. They know that that's suicide politically and militarily.
Wow. This is about the best I've heard about this situation, and thank you both. And now we're going to Morocco. Mohammed Tajuddin Houssani has the following. Henry Kissinger stated a few weeks before his death that World War II would inevitably come within 3 or 4 years. Could the Israeli response to Iran lead to such a war? And related to the previous question, is Israel going to make it worse for itself if it attacks now, related to the previous question and this question? Which one of you? You're both smiling.
I can take it again. I, I'm not sure. I mean, I tend to think we're going to find we're going to muddle our way through this for a bit. But, the concern, of course, because we have, an ongoing conflict in the Ukraine, in addition to what's happening in Gaza, in addition to what's happening between Iran and Israel, and of course concerns that we could also have escalation, over the Taiwan Strait. I think for me, I think it's unlikely that all of that is going to converge into a larger singular conflict. At the same time, it is from my perspective clear that each of those theaters are interacting with each other, and as we're seeing Moscow and Beijing and Tehran, and sometimes Pyongyang in North Korea coordinate more strategically. And I think all of these conflicts are actually pushing those three powers closer together, to the point where even though there still are many challenges for them, I don't call it an alliance. Do we start talking about the axis of evil again? I don't know. But the concern is that what's happening in each of these three theaters is creating strategic, I won't say dependencies, but strategic pathways of thinking and planning, as well as arming and sharing of doctrine and lessons learned, that technology cooperation that's going on among these three powers, and four, including North Korea, that is going to kind of create mutual dependencies, strategic dependencies over time, that could really make it very complicated. If we have pressures in the Taiwan Strait, does that accelerate situations in the Middle East or Russia, or vice versa? If things get really bad for Iran or really bad for Russia, does that put pressure on China to ramp up its situation? But again, I think that's where I'm worried about the different fights interacting. I don't know that kind of merging into a full World War III situation. I'm less convinced that's going to happen.
So I'll add my 2 cents. I believe that Ukraine is far more important in terms of long-term Western interests, protection of Europe, protection of democratic values, and so forth. And I worry that the Middle East has distracted the United States because of issues of who do you aid and how much equipment do you provide. And I'm really sorry to see that the Ukrainians are now in a position that they're losing territory, and there's open talk of even losing the war, or losing territory quasi permanently. I do think that the interesting dynamic between China, Russia, and Iran is that they are very strange bedfellows. Russia post-communism, autocratic rule, but it's not communist in ideology. China is communist. Iran hates communism and doesn't like, kind of. So they need each other. They use each other. The interesting thing is China's playing off Russia against Iran with discounted oil. Both countries are sanctioned, need to sell oil, and so China's exploiting their necessities. I think Xi Jinping is laughing all the way to the bank. He's seeing the West distracted, especially the United States, by the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. I worry that down the road, we have some kind of something happen in the Indo-Pacific, particularly over Taiwan. I think that kind of offensive by China is a little bit more complicated than people think, but Xi Jinping has made clear that he intends to take back Taiwan, and in his period of his rule. And of course, he's kind of around in an open-ended way now. So when we think about this alliance, I think there are ways that we can shortstop it. that we can accentuate the differences between the two of them. But it involves, again, kind of imaginative diplomacy, doing more than we are, not abandoning the front line in Ukraine because of the Middle East. And I think, unfortunately, those issues have merged in a way that's counterproductive kind of for everything we want to see happen.
The funny thing is, the next question was going to be just this, so I want to give the person who I think is a former UCLA student, as I recall, Eli Saltzman, a community member. She says, can you please address the connection between the war in Ukraine and the Iranian attack? To what extent, if at all, is this a case of failed deterrence on behalf of the U.S. administration? So this relates to where you just were, Robin. Any further comments? No. Matt?
Only to add that I do think, as this reevaluation, there was, in my opinion, a failure of deterrence on our part. I mean, it's been made pretty well known that we were sending frequent messages, to the Iranians to not conduct this attack. Obviously, that didn't work, and I think that the U.S. has got to reevaluate again how effective our deterrence is right now at that strategic level, even though I think the demonstration of our capabilities on Saturday has certainly aided our deterrence. But this is again similar to the situation that we had with Putin in 2021 and early 2022, where we were also similar to here, disclosing intelligence information, making very clear what our messages are, which are I fully support both of these policies. I think that's actually been some of the best things to see in U.S. foreign policy recently, is our use of disclosed intelligence and attempts to improve our messaging. But I think it still shows that we have not figured out how to really deter folks like either Putin or civilian or Khamenei, which makes me even more nervous that we're going to have any effect or have the effect we want with Xi Jinping potentially in the future.
This is from Mohammed Husani from Morocco, but I think it's different from the past. I'm going to ask it anyway. Israeli said there will be no ceasefire because the complete distraction before the complete distraction of Hamas. I think complete destruction, I think, is what's meant. May be wrong. How can we imagine a just solution of the crisis, particularly the recognition of a viable Palestinian state? Also, can we consider Houthis as a national movement looking for the vital interests of Yemeni people, or just a tool acting for the Iranian interests in the region? We had a big discussion of that yesterday, and of course, anybody can read it, can hear it. It'll be ready in a couple of days. But to the two of you, what do you think of that? And there's another similar question that I'm going to ask because it's related to the previous one. This is from Helen Lackner in Oxford. Although the Saudi-Emirati rivalry was first visible in Yemen in about 2017, it is now far broader and expanding in all kinds of other sectors, oil prices, now AL, plenty others, although Yemen remains a major focus. And as AG said, it is keeping the Saudis in the Yemeni quagmire. Also, as a person who worked in rural development in Yemen for decades and someone who believes in community level issues and democracy, no way can be transformed into a solution to the national fragmentation of the leadership, rather the contrary. So we're dealing with Yemen and a couple of ideas. Good luck. And I think you're coming in first. So go right ahead.
So I love Yemen. I took my mother there in the mid-1990s on vacation. I mean, it's just such a wonderful place. I always say it's the closest place on Earth to know what it's like to live on another planet, because everything is different in terms of human settlements and the way things get done. I just want to make one point generally on the Houthis and on Iran's axis of resistance. We tend to always just say Iranian-backed Hezbollah, Iranian-backed Houthis, whatever. All of these groups have their own agenda. All of them are exploiting Iran in the same way Iran is exploiting them. where they have commonalities, but there are also issues on which they have differences, and they all emerged in context of local politics. So no, Houthis, don't represent all of Yemen, and they don't hold all of Yemen. And the tragedy is that on the eve of October 7th, we saw some movement toward a resolution of the conflict between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, but everything is frozen, whether it's the future of Yemen or the Saudi relationship with Israel. And I mean, that's one of the tragic byproducts of this conflict. So I'll turn it over to Matt.
All right, Matt.
Yeah, I think, for a, and I'm honestly, I'm not a specialist on the Palestinian, issue, but I think the concern that Israel is facing is that its current effort to, destroy Hamas, which I think we've already seen indications that their recognition that it's not going to quite play out like that, that they're going to have to reevaluate that strategy, and probably are reevaluating exactly what that's going to look like, because we were seeing, Hamas in limited ways is already reconstituting in areas after the Israelis have left. I think the Israelis are going to eventually find themselves, in a combination of counterinsurgency, counterintelligence, and peacekeeping, and in redevelopment all at the same time, which this, as some have noted, this, is going to feel a little bit like Iraq was for us. And I think that, which is kind of goes to one of Robin's earlier points about how long this situation could go on. And so I think for the Israelis, they're going to have to think through what is really going to get them the security that they want in the end. Certainly, the U.S. still supports a two-state solution, and I think some form of that is still most likely the way forward, that would provide that. Obviously, I'm pessimistic we're going to get that right in the near term, but I do think that the whole region is going to have to reevaluate its policies towards the Palestinians in general. Both those that support and those that have been, at least, supporting Hamas or supporting Fatah or opposing it. That I think all of that is going to be reevaluated and is being reevaluated. On Yemen, it's important to understand this evolution of the axis of resistance, that the Houthis were a thing before there was an axis of resistance, and well, at least in its kind of modern form, and of course over the years they have developed close relationships with Lebanese Hezbollah, and of course with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Quds Force, and they have become obviously a very important part of that axis now. But at the same time, since October 7th, they have really appreciated the credibility that they have appeared to have gained within the Islamic community, within the Arab community, as the ones fighting for the Palestinians more directly than anyone else. And I think it's put some very interesting pressures on Iran to be able to continue what it believes is its rightful place to lead the Islamic community, and not only from an Islamic revolutionary standpoint, but just from the Islamic community as a whole. And I think that's part of what is interesting right now, of what why things were more more significant in the retaliation on Saturday, and why some of this is we are seeing greater risk taking by the Iranian leadership. Is this kind of pressure from the Houthis that they are not simply proxies here, they are partners, and sometimes in certain ways they are kind of taking the lead on things, and in ways that may not always align with where Iran wants to go, or at least at the tempo that Iran wants to go. And so for me, this dynamic of pressure between among the key groups within the Axis and Iran, really where Lebanese Hezbollah is going to go. We haven't really talked much about Lebanon in this situation for next steps, but certainly everyone's concerned that we're going to have another opening of a full Lebanon front. We already have a lower level amount of activity, but that is one of the things that Hezbollah for now is restrained and does not necessarily want to go further. The Israelis also, I don't think, want to, but I think they feel like they may need to, which is the big concern. So I think that really where Hezbollah, where the Houthis are, and where the Iranian leadership, and particularly the Revolutionary Guard, are, is a very changing, quickly evolving dynamic since October 7th.
Okay, we move on. This is interesting. Nikolay Surkov from Moscow. Are there immediate risks for the GCC? If there are any, what are they? Either of you want to take this on?
Yeah, probably. I do think that as we were talking about before on the domestic concerns that you have in Jordan and Egypt, I think those domestic concerns probably exist to a more limited degree within the GCC itself. There was obviously some rumors, very kind of uncertain exactly if what played out about the willingness for the Gulf states to allow their territory to be used for any kind of U.S. response in the defense of Israel. I think that's something that, from what I understand, in the end, the accesses that the U.S. needed were provided. So in the end, that there was no actual concern. But I think that is something that each of the Gulf states are going to have to evaluate after this. That on the one hand, there's obviously some debate and fear about becoming more directly enmeshed in the Gaza conflict. They don't want to do that. But I also see from what we're hearing from the region, that the performance of the partners on Saturday is actually encouraging greater discussion about how we can go further with this. And in a way which really is surprising after October 7th, which we thought, as Robin pointed out, so much of that progress on normalization and increasing our diplomatic relationships across the region really was being put on hold, if not reversed. And I think Saturday's attack is putting that back on the agenda in a very strong way. So I think that the Gulf states are still making their own hedging and calculations about how to manage both Iran and the U.S. and Israel. They're going to continue to navigate that. But I do think that the Gulf states are, in some ways, in a better place now than they were before Saturday.
Now, we've only got 10 minutes for questions and answers, and I'm trying desperately to get everybody in. Next is Eric Salkoff of UCLA alum. Since China and Russia support Iran, do you think sanctions on Iran would be effective if China and Russia do not honor those sanctions? Also, Israel wants to go into Rafah to destroy the tunnels that go into Egypt and have supplied Hamas to destroy the last Hamas battalions and to free the hostages. Do you see any scenario that Israel will listen to the U.S. and not go into Rafah? And why do you think the U.S. does not understand the importance of going into Rafah? So, big question, not less time. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first very quickly. First, I don't think Israel is listening to the United States on very much. There were passions unleashed on October 7th. They continue to define policy and politics in Israel. I see no, despite the death toll, despite the destruction, despite the human stories coming out of Gaza, I don't see any major change in public opinion beyond questions about Bibi and the desire to get hostages home. I think that's again, this is a domestic focus and not one on what's happening in Gaza. I don't think that the question is destroying an infrastructure, destroying tunnels, is that going to be enough to destroy Hamas? And I'm not so sure long term. Again, there are differences between kind of what some would describe as a military success versus a political or public opinion success. And I think that the Israelis are not being as thoughtful as they could be in terms of their long-term interests. And look, Russia and China are not going to join in the United States or help sanctions, and as a result, the impact of sanctions will be partial, but certainly not completely effective.
We're going to go on. So I'm looking for it. We have one, I believe we have one more question. I don't see any more, and perhaps Manny Dad, who's been providing all this and making so much, making this so much easier, will tell me if I'm wrong. Anyway, this is from dear Suleiman, who's his third question. It seems there was a contradiction in the points being made. On one hand, there's an expressed desire to halt Houthi momentum, yet on the other, there appears to be reluctance to support anti-Houthi groups. Why not look into a proven track record, such as the success of the southern governorates had in repelling the Houthis? So I don't know if either one of you has any questions on that. And as I say, I am looking to make sure, but no, we have another question. There may be, at least. I may not have been. Okay, no, don't worry about that. What about this? Either one of you want to take it?
Yeah, I can take that one. This has actually been a real challenge for U.S. policy, especially since October 7th in the Red Sea, that we were heading towards, and I think it's still after October 7th we were still heading towards the pathway. I forget exactly the term that we use for the kind of resolution of the Saudi Houthi fight that we were facilitating. That was something that was our number one priority. It was certainly what the Saudis wanted, and I think that when the Houthis began escalating against Red Sea shipping, it became very complicated for us. And it frankly really delayed what I think should have been a better policy or decision making on our part, recognizing the situation had really changed, and that we were reluctant to pressure the Houthis with any effect, given that we were on this peace pathway with the Saudis. I think that's obviously changed a bit because it became just simply intolerable. But I would agree in some ways with the questioner that it's very unlikely that the types of kind of punches in the face that we're doing right now, in addition to the Houthis, as well as our cooperation we're doing with our partners in trying to protect freedom of navigation, that's probably not going to be sufficient to really change Houthi behavior. And I think that's something that we looking at ways to pressure the Houthis again without completely derailing the peace process, which is the difficulty, but to encourage those types of those groups or civil society within Yemen that were frankly before October 7th were not very happy with Houthi leadership. The Houthis were facing a lot of pushback from some of the clans and from the larger population, the cities and elsewhere, and so I think that those are areas where that we could be encouraging the Yemeni people. Still, it's not going to solve all of it, but I think we can increase that pressure on the Houthis to pull back as beyond just simply punching them in the face every now and again.
Can I just add very quickly to that? I worry a little bit, and Matt may have a better definition of the word encourage. I worry a lot about where the United States goes in and kind of decides, well, we don't like the people who are the military or the political power, so we're going to do a lot of things, engage more visibly in trying to create an alternative. I just want to point out what we did in Iraq and how successful that was, right? I think we need to be very careful and let kind of local politics play out. I do think something interesting has happened in Yemen that we're not paying enough attention to. In the early days, as the Houthis escalated their attacks on Red Sea shipping after the Gaza war erupted, that we were in the early days engaging in intercepts, trying to prevent the Houthi missiles and drones from hitting international shipping. But we have very steadily started going after anything we see being loaded in Yemen. We did not pay enough attention in the run-up, even though the Houthis were active against international shipping before October 7th. We had no idea no estimate of what the Houthi arsenal was. And so now we've gotten to a point that we're actually taking the war to the Houthis. And I think at some point that could, look as if we're engaged in a war with the Houthis, not just trying to be protective or defensive or a deterrent. And no one's paying much attention to that, but it's an interesting question and something we should all watch.
Interesting. Well, we have one more question and we have 5 more minutes before we go to our conclusion. So I've never seen a program that actually came this way, and we don't have to. So we have everybody. Israel. This is Eric Selkoff from UCLA alum. The second question. Somebody just. All right, we'll do our best. Israel says that they have killed 14,000 Hamas terrorists, and if 30,000 Gazans were killed, that would mean that almost half of the deaths were Hamas militants. Hamas claims that 2/3 of its deaths are women and children, and does not release numbers of how many of its militants have been killed. Also, many sources doubt the Hamas released numbers of deaths. If the Israeli numbers are correct, why doesn't the world understand how careful Israel has been to avoid civilian deaths? And we have from David Kennard, what are Israel's options in deciding its response to Iran? And so we can do a last. Fatma Abdullah, to Matthew, you mentioned that October 7th has stopped to talks between KSA and Houthis. How do you explain the visit to Saudi earlier this week? So this does allow us to finish everything. I don't envy the two of you. See what you can do. Let's start with, let's do it this way. Matt, who I know has to leave slightly early, I'm going to give you now, you can say everything you want about these or anything else. And then for the last section, we'll turn to Robin. And in Robin's case, you can talk as long as you want because there won't be anyone else. Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. For the issue on October 7th that the questioner had, I didn't want to imply that this talks had stopped. I think the concern was that we didn't want to derail those talks that were ongoing, and that our special envoy Tim Linder-King was leading or helping to facilitate, that those were an effort that we were very concerned about disrupting by going after the Houthis more directly. So that was the real conundrum, I think, for the United States at the beginning of the Red Sea escalation. But I think that right now, I think we're kind of past that a bit. It's still ongoing, as far as I know. I actually haven't been updated more recently on that, but I think we're still trying to pursue everything, pushing back the Houthis, keeping the talks with the Saudis going, and as well as addressing the humanitarian situation. So all of that's happening. I would say on the Israeli options for Iran, we're obviously, from what I understand, we're encouraging, for better or for worse, the Israelis to be restrained or to simply kind of take the win, given the success of our collective defenses on Saturday. But certainly the U.S. Will not be supporting any Israeli counterstrike. And that we made that pretty clear, and that is certainly what we will be doing. But the options, the Israelis will have a lot of options. But that debate about whether we go, whether they go for things like the nuclear infrastructure, or they go for, say, for example, IRGC. Command and control, or they go for, say, missile production facilities or missile deployment sites. That there's, given if you're looking for retaliatory options. Given what was targeted on Saturday, there's a whole wealth of things that theoretically the Israelis could go for. And from the U.S. concern, the issue is, we really want to be careful about or encouraging the Israelis to be very thoughtful about the types of targets if they are going to do something, that is something that is going to be able to manage the escalation, because we liked what how we performed on Saturday, but obviously we don't want to have a repeat of that if we can avoid it, and given that the risk of miscalculation, I think that's the real concern. But the Israelis do have a number of options that they can either through their missile or air forces can conduct.
You have anything else to say, since I know you have to leave us?
I can stay on for a couple of minutes, but otherwise it's been great joining you, and this has been a really excellent conversation with you and Robin.
It's been quite an experience. Thank you. All right, Robin, your turn.
Thanks, Matt. He's always a dynamic speaker, and I always learn from him. A couple of things. When it comes to the options for Israel, frankly, I don't know what Israel's objective is. We know that Bibi Netanyahu doesn't want Iran to get a bomb, but when it comes to what is it trying to do when it comes to Iran politically, kinetically, across the board, in a broader way, what does we know that Israel wants to destroy Hamas, annihilate, as some of its officials have said. We know that it wants to Hezbollah to push back on the border. I actually think, and I've talked to senior U.S. officials involved in this diplomacy, that there is a deal that is attainable if the Gaza war ends with with Hezbollah. Hezbollah is now so far back from the border that it wouldn't involve a major withdrawal, something that would be kind of embarrassing for Hezbollah. It's already lost territory, equipment, leadership in the south. And I think for the first time, Nasrallah wants to define that border in a way he didn't after the 2006 war, because that would mean that Hezbollah was recognizing Israel's right to exist. Now he has a security interest in defining that border. When it comes to the number of deaths, they're talking about 33,000. Look, Hamas has provided names, whether they're real or not, I don't know. There are those on the ground, international aid organizations, the United Nations agencies that have used some of these figures. But to me, you're talking about 33,000, even if half of them are Hamas, that still means 15,000 civilians have been killed. And that's really painful. A lot of us expected Israel to be a little bit more careful in its military operations to avoid deaths. We've all seen videos of, the children, really young children, not teenagers who might be members of Hamas, but the really little ones who died. And I think this is not good for Israel's long-term image or its kind of reputation as being one of the most moral states in the world.
So, do you have any other comments as we?
No, I think we've covered an awful lot of bases today. It's very impressive. And thank you, Steve, for organizing this, and to Salome and Mani for organizing everything.
Thank you. Actually, we're going to move right into this and be right on time. First of all, the two of you were amazing, and we're so lucky to have both of you, and I think the country is so lucky to have both of you. And this was a critical moment, and we were able to have this kind of session. I feel like I know more about what's going on, and I hope everyone else does too. And my next point is your last point, Manny Jad, who was behind the scenes the entire program and was giving me all the questions. I want to thank her so much. Salome Mohajer and Laura Lee, who Monday morning, preparing for a session on Wednesday, learned that we were going to do something on Thursday and pulled it off. It was amazing. It's the quickest and highest number we've ever had. Maybe couple of days, we should do when we have it faster. No, I'm kidding. But the point is, we do thank them and Emily Pistoli, who always helps so much, and I work with very strongly. But I should tell everyone that CMED is not finished. It has we've been working on this for months, and we have quite a bit to offer in the next few weeks. And so you all see this, what is possible when Israelis and Palestinians work together, which would be a little different, is a little different, it does occur. And we'll be discussing that on Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, a live event, and registration is required as always, as all of these, but are available. Women in Conflict, Voices, Resilience, and Solutions will have Wednesday, May 1st. That's the following week. And then Sudan, the lesser known war, a terrible war that we felt we had to discuss, and nobody pays much attention to it, but we know people, and it's just awful. Thursday, May 16th. The details are coming soon in the latter two cases, but we are up and running for the Thursday, April 25th. So we hope to see you soon. We have an exciting series over the next few weeks. And again, we thank both of our speakers for this very useful session in very difficult times. We hope to see you soon, but for now, it's bye. Bye-bye.